My name is Hazel Vance. I am 30 years old and I analyze digital security threats for a living. I spend my days hunting anomalies, tracing digital footprints, and securing networks against unauthorized breaches. But the greatest vulnerability I ever encountered was sitting right across from me at my parents' mahogany dining table in Buckhead, Georgia. It was Thanksgiving, and my older brother Preston was holding court. He leaned back in his tufted chair, swirled his bourbon, and asked the question he asked every single year. "Tell me, Hazel," he said, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure the entire table was listening. "Are you still funding your landlord's early retirement? I heard the lease rates in Midtown took another hike. Keep this up, and you will be renting a studio closet by the time you hit 40. A polite, synchronized ripple of laughter traveled down the long table. My mother, Patricia, reached for her wine. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light from the chandelier overhead as she offered a soft, practiced sigh. "We just hoped for a better foundation for you, sweetheart. A Vance ought to have roots. Renting is just so transient. It lacks dignity." I did not argue. I kept my posture relaxed and carefully sliced a piece of pecan pie. For 6 years, my modest apartment had been their favorite joke. They thought I was the failure of the family, the one who could not afford to buy a house, the one who lacked the Vance ambition. But here is what none of them knew. I track data. I read the fine print. And while they were laughing at my lease, they had no idea that the matriarch of our family had spent the last 8 months making quiet trips to the county records office. Welcome back to Orange Vengeance, where loud arrogance always loses to quiet competence, and the truth takes its time, but never misses. If you enjoy watching entitled people dismantle their own lives, you are in the right place. Drop your age and your city in the comments and be sure to subscribe. In Georgia, especially among the old money circles my parents desperately clung to, land is not mere property. Soil means honor. Acreage means stability. Generational inheritance is the ultimate symbol of superiority, and to rent is to admit defeat. My family wore their history like a crown, but none of them actually understood what it took to protect it. I chewed my pie in silence while my father William shook his head in mock pity. "In my profession, you do not react to a threat until you have isolated it." I let them laugh. They all assumed my quietness was submission. They assumed I had nothing to say because I had nothing to show for myself. But halfway down the table, Clara Vance was not smiling. My grandmother sat upright, her posture a relic of an era when Southern etiquette required a spine of steel. She wore a simple wool cardigan, looking entirely out of place among the glittering jewels and tailored suits of her descendants. I watched her hand tighten around her crystal glass of sweet tea. Her knuckles turned white. The ice clinked against the rim, a sharp, singular sound of disapproval that everyone else managed to ignore. Preston tapped his fork against his plate, eager to shift the spotlight back to his favorite subject, himself. Speaking of proper foundations, Preston announced, his voice carrying the polished cadence of a practiced salesman. "The firm finished the topographical surveys last week. I am proud to formally announce the Oakhaven project." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. Oakhaven was 200 acres of pristine, historic land. It was the crown jewel of the Vance legacy. It was also legally and presently Clara's home. She had lived on that land for 60 years. Luxury subdivisions. Preston continued gesturing with his free hand. Private equestrian trails built right through the eastern timber. 50 custom-built homes on the ancestral acreage. "We bring the bulldozers in by April." He spoke of leveling her pastures as if the deed were already resting in his briefcase. Preston assumed inheritance was a guarantee. He treated his grandmother's estate as his own personal development site, a foregone conclusion waiting on a death certificate. He did not ask Clara for permission. He did not even look at her while he outlined the destruction of her home. My father raised his glass, beaming with pride at his son. To the next era of Vance development. The table erupted into applause. My mother clapped her hands, her diamonds flashing. Preston smiled, soaking in the admiration. They were celebrating the paving of a legacy they did not yet own, spending money they had not yet earned on land they had no legal right to touch. I looked across the room, cutting through the performative cheers, and locked eyes with Clara. The 80-year-old matriarch sat motionless amid the noise. She did not yell. She did not correct her grandson. She just took a slow sip of her tea, lowered the glass, and gave me a single, deliberate wink. I drove back to Midtown in the quiet dark. My apartment was a study in minimalism. No crystal chandeliers, no mahogany tables, no oil portraits of long-dead ancestors staring down from the walls. Just clean lines, neutral colors, and the low, steady hum of my workstation cooling fans. My family viewed this space as a monument to my failure. They thought living in a leased unit meant I lacked drive. I viewed it as a sanctuary from their endless, exhausting performance. As an information security analyst, I evaluate systems for vulnerabilities. My job is to find the hairline fractures in a firewall before they shatter, to anticipate the breach before the alarm ever sounds. For years, my father William referred to my career as just typing on a computer. He valued brick and mortar, tangible assets, things he could touch and boast about at the country club. He did not understand that in the modern world, data is the foundation of everything. That night, I sat at my desk, booted up my primary monitor, and decided to run a diagnostic on my own brother. I did not hack into anything. I did not steal passwords, bypass security protocols, or breach private servers. People like Preston Vance do not require complex cyber espionage to be exposed. They leave their vulnerabilities lying around in the public record, assuming no one will ever be smart enough to bother looking. Arrogance is always the most exploitable flaw in any security system. I initiated a standard open-source intelligence sweep on Preston and his primary holding company. I pulled public tax filings, municipal permit records, and county civil dockets. I cross-referenced the various limited liability company names with corporate filings registered with the Georgia Secretary of State. It took less than 40 minutes for the polished veneer of the Vance development empire to dissolve on my dual screens. Preston was not building a dynasty. He was orchestrating a desperate shell game. The data told a clear, unforgiving story of rapid, unsustainable expansion. I traced the money back to 2 commercial projects in Savannah. Both were luxury waterfront developments. Both were tied up in environmental litigation and zoning disputes. The construction sites had been sitting idle for 14 months, bleeding capital every single day. Preston was drowning in high-interest bridge loans. The corporate debt was staggering. It was a precarious tower of leveraged assets threatening to collapse at any moment. He was weeks away from total insolvency. His creditors were circling, filing preliminary notices that hinted at impending asset seizures. That was the real reason behind his sudden, frantic push for the Oak Haven project. He did not have the capital to build 50 custom homes. He did not have the funds to clear the eastern timber or lay a single mile of equestrian trails. He needed the ancestral land for one specific purpose: collateral. If he could pledge those 200 acres to the bank, he could refinance his Savannah loans and buy himself another year to figure out a way out of his mess. Without Oak Haven, Preston Vance was bankrupt. I hit print on the compiled financial dossiers. The laser printer in the corner of my office woke up from its sleep mode. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and listened to the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the pages sliding into the output tray. One by one, the physical proof of my brother and his impending ruin stacked up in the quiet room. It was a deeply comforting sound. In my line of work, you learn very quickly that panic is useless. Screaming does not secure a compromised network. Crying does not decrypt a ransomware file. Patience, logic, and documentation do the heavy lifting. I placed the warm sheets of paper into a crisp manila folder, closed it, and went to sleep with a clear mind. The next morning, I drove out to Oak Haven. The estate sat at the end of a long, winding driveway, lined with century-old live oaks draped in heavy Spanish moss. It was the kind of property that real estate developers salivated over. Pristine, untouched, and steeped in generational history. Clara had lived in the white farmhouse at the center of the acreage since the day she married my grandfather. Every fence post and garden bed held a memory. I parked my car near the old carriage house, intending to check on the storm windows before the winter rain set in. I walked toward the wraparound porch, my footsteps muffled by the damp morning grass. Before I reached the wooden steps, I heard a voice cutting through the quiet air. It was Preston. His tone was sharp-clipped, stripped of the easy southern charm he wore so effortlessly at the Thanksgiving table. I stopped moving and stood perfectly still behind the thick lattice of the climbing roses. "I need this signed today," Nana Preston said. His shadow stretched across the painted porch floorboards, tall and imposing. "It is just standard estate planning. Dad and I have already reviewed the paperwork with the attorneys. There is nothing to worry about." Clara sat in her woven wicker rocking chair, a wool shawl pulled tight around her shoulders against the morning chill. She did not reach for the silver pen he was holding out. She just looked at the thick stack of legal documents resting on the glass patio table. "You want a power of attorney?" Clara stated. Her voice was thin but steady, carrying the gravel of a woman who had survived decades of hard winters. "I manage my own affairs, Preston." "It is a formality," he insisted, stepping closer, looming over her small frame. "You are 80 years old. Managing 200 acres is too much of a burden for a woman your age. If you fall ill, or if something happens to your memory, the state could tie up the land in probate for years. The taxes alone would eat up the cash reserves. This document just gives me the authority to handle the burdens and the maintenance. It keeps the legacy safe." I watched through the rose bushes as he tapped the signature line with a manicured fingernail. He was cornering an elderly woman on her own front porch, using fear as a weapon. Preston was not waiting for nature to take its course. He was not waiting for an inheritance. The Savannah creditors were breathing down his neck, and he was trying to steal the land before they called in his loans. A power of attorney would give him the legal right to pledge Oakhaven as collateral the very next day, encumbering the property with millions of dollars in debt that Clara knew nothing about. Clara looked up at her grandson. She studied his face for a long time, reading the hidden panic he was trying so hard to mask with false concern. She did not flinch. She did not sign the paper. She simply folded her hands in her lap. "I will have my own lawyer review it on Monday," she said quietly. Preston stiffened, his jaw clenched. He snatched the pen off the table, the veneer of the loving grandson fracturing right in front of me. "Suit yourself," he muttered, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "But you are putting the whole family at risk with this stubbornness." He turned and stormed down the porch steps, marching right past the rose bushes without ever noticing I was standing 3 feet away. 3 days after the incident on the porch, my phone buzzed at 2 in the morning. The caller ID displayed the name of a local county hospital. The emergency room triage nurse informed me that Clara Vance had suffered a minor ischemic stroke. Blood flow to a specific region of her brain had been temporarily restricted. She was stable, resting in the intensive care unit and expected to make a full recovery, but the next 24 hours required strict observation. I dressed quickly, grabbed my keys, and navigated the empty Atlanta highways. As an information security analyst, I am trained to handle sudden system failures. You do not panic when an alarm triggers. You assess the damage, isolate the compromised sector, and implement protocols to mitigate further loss. I treated family emergencies with the exact same clinical detachment. By the time I reached the stark fluorescent-lit waiting room, my family was already there. However, the tension radiating from my father and brother had nothing to do with medical concern. They were pacing the scuffed linoleum floor, their voices hushed and frantic. My father, William, built his entire identity on dominating those around him. As a man who inherited his wealth rather than earning a single dime of it, he treated every asset as a fragile pillar holding up his ego. He was not asking the nurses about neurological assessments or stroke rehabilitation. He was leaning close to Preston, his voice a tight, frantic hiss about probate timelines and asset vulnerability. I walked toward them, my footsteps muted by the rubber soles of my boots. Preston saw me first, his jaw tightening. William turned, and that was when I noticed the fourth person standing in their tight circle. It was a man I recognized from endless corporate dinners. Jonathan Bradley carried a leather briefcase and wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked entirely absurd in a cardiac ward at 4 in the morning. Jonathan was my father's lead litigator. You do not bring a high-priced corporate attorney to a hospital waiting room to check on a sick mother. You bring him to execute legally binding documents. William did not greet me. He just checked his gold watch and gestured toward the double doors of the intensive care unit. The doctor said she is awake, William stated, adjusting his silk tie. We are going in right now. I stepped directly into his path. What is he doing here? I asked, nodding toward the lawyer. William bristled, standing tall to project authority. We need to secure the estate, Hazel. Clara is in a highly vulnerable state. If she loses cognitive function today, the state will step in and Oakhaven will be tied up in bureaucratic red tape for a decade. Jonathan has the power of attorney paperwork printed and ready. She just needs to sign on the dotted line. She just had a stroke, I replied, my voice steady, betraying zero emotion. She is heavily medicated. Preston sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. It is a simple signature, Hazel. It takes 5 seconds. Stop acting so dramatic and move out of the way. They stepped forward in unison, expecting me to shrink back. I did not. I shifted my weight, planting myself squarely in the center of the threshold. My primary function at work is to recognize unauthorized access attempts and block them. I treat physical space the same way I treat digital networks. You do not argue with a brute force attack. You simply deny entry based on established security protocols. You cannot go in there with legal documents, I said, keeping my tone flat and clinical. Hospital regulations strictly limit visitors in this ward to immediate family members only. Mr. Bradley is not family. He stays out here in the waiting area. Jonathan cleared his throat, attempting to use an intimidating legal posture. Miss Vance, I am acting on behalf of the family trust to protect your grandmother's interests. I looked directly at his expensive leather briefcase. And Clara is under the influence of intravenous blood thinners, mild sedatives, and narcotic pain relievers. Under Georgia law, any legal document executed by a patient lacking clear cognitive capacity due to heavy medication is voidable. If you try to make a stroke victim sign a property transfer in an intensive care unit, I will personally file a report with the State Bar Association for severe ethical misconduct. The lawyer froze in his tracks. He knew my assessment was accurate. A signature obtained under these coercive conditions would never survive a competent legal challenge, and his professional license would be directly on the line. He took a slow step backward, deliberately distancing himself from my father. William turned a deep, furious shade of crimson. His authority was being questioned in public by the daughter he considered a monumental failure. He stepped dangerously close to my face, lowering his voice into a sharp, venomous hiss. You are an embarrassment, Hazel. He spat the words, dripping with decades of unchecked elitism. You lack any real ambition. You rent a tiny box in the city while we build empires. You contribute nothing of value to the Vance name. You do not understand family legacy, and you never will. You are risking everything we have built just to play the stubborn hero. Get out of my way before I have you removed. He expected me to flinch. He expected tears or shouting or a desperate defense of my own worth. But I had spent my entire adult life absorbing their insults. I knew that reacting only fed their false sense of power. I looked at the digital clock mounted on the wall above the nurse's station. It read 5:45 in the morning. Official visiting hours ended precisely at 6. I just needed to hold the defensive line for 15 more minutes. I will not move, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the rigid weight of an iron door slamming shut. And if you try to push past me, I will hit the panic button on that wall and have hospital security escort you both off the premises. Preston scoffed, running an agitated hand through his hair, but he did not dare step forward. Bullies rely entirely on momentum. When they hit a solid wall that refuses to bend, they stall. The 3 men stood in the hallway, fuming, trading harsh whispers, but none of them crossed the threshold. I watched the clock tick down. 5:50, 5:55, 6 o'clock. A stern charge nurse rounded the corner carrying a medical clipboard. Visiting hours are over, gentlemen, she announced, pointing a firm finger toward the elevators. Only one designated health proxy can remain. The rest of you need to leave this floor immediately. William glared at me, his eyes promising future retribution. This is far from over, he warned. He turned on his heel and marched toward the exit, followed closely by Preston and the defeated lawyer. The heavy silence of the cardiac ward rushed back in the moment the elevator doors slid shut. I exhaled a long, measured breath and turned around, walking quietly into Clara's room. The space was dim, illuminated only by the rhythmic green glow of the vital sign monitors. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic and clean linen, a stark contrast to the toxic atmosphere in the hallway. I sat down in the vinyl chair beside her bed. Clara looked small among the tangled wires and plastic tubing. Her silver hair spread across the sterile white pillow. I reached for the plastic cup resting on the bedside table, scooped a few small ice chips onto a plastic spoon, and gently touched them to her dry lips. She took them gratefully, closing her eyes as the cold water provided a tiny measure of comfort. We sat there in the quiet dark, the steady beep of the heart monitor serving as the only sound bridging the gap between us. I watched her chest rise and fall, marveling at the quiet strength radiating from her fragile frame. She had endured my father's arrogance and my brother's unchecked greed for years, preserving her dignity through sheer stoicism. After several minutes, the monitor beeped a little faster. Clara opened her eyes. The sedatives were beginning to wear off, leaving her gaze sharp and highly focused. She shifted her weight, ignoring the restrictive wires, and weakly reached out her hand. I took it, feeling the papery thinness of her skin against my palm. She pulled my hand close to her chest, urging me to lean down. I brought my ear just inches from her face, waiting for whatever request she needed to make. Her voice was raspy, barely a breath, but the words were crystalline. She recited a sequence of 7 specific numbers. Then she named a specific clerk who worked at the Fulton County Records Office. I memorized the data instantly, filing it away in my mind like a secure encryption key. Clara squeezed my fingers, her eyes burning with a fierce, brilliant defiance. "Check the public record, Hazel," she whispered, a faint smile touching the corner of her mouth. I beat them to it. I left the hospital as the morning sun began to burn off the early fog hovering over the Atlanta skyline. My car tires hummed against the damp asphalt of Interstate 75. Instead of heading back to my apartment to sleep, I drove directly toward the downtown municipal district. I had a specific numerical sequence burned into my memory. In my line of work, a 7-digit string represents the difference between a locked vault and wide-open access. We spend our lives building digital fortresses, forgetting that the most devastating secrets are often stored on physical paper, filed away in municipal basements, where cybersecurity means nothing. The government building was a brutalist structure of poured concrete and tinted glass. It smelled of industrial floor wax and stale coffee. Citizens sat in molded plastic chairs, clutching numbered tickets, waiting to dispute property taxes or file marriage certificates. I did not take a ticket. I bypassed the standard inquiry lines entirely. Clara had given me a specific name, and I intended to use it. I approached a side counter where an older woman with silver-framed glasses was sorting through stacks of manila folders. Her name badge matched the one my grandmother had whispered in the quiet dark of the cardiac ward. I introduced myself and recited the sequence of numbers. The clerk stopped sorting immediately. She looked at me closely, a silent recognition passing between us. She did not ask for clarification or identification. She simply turned around, unlocked a heavy metal filing cabinet behind her desk, and retrieved a thick sealed folio. She slid it across the laminated counter. The transaction was seamless, untraceable, and utterly definitive. I took the folio to a quiet wooden table in the corner of the archives room. The air was cool and dry, carefully preserved to protect aging ink. I broke the wax seal and opened the heavy cardstock cover. Inside lay a stack of certified legal documents. I skimmed past the standard municipal boilerplate, my eyes searching for the operational clauses. My training allowed me to parse complex syntax quickly, hunting for the core function of the text. It took me less than a minute to understand the profound magnitude of what Clara had orchestrated. 8 months ago, while my family was busy mocking my leased apartment over our annual Easter dinner, Clara had sat in a law office and executed an irrevocable deed of gift. She had legally transferred the entirety of the Oakhaven estate directly into my name. The transfer was absolute and unassailable. There were no trust provisions my father could contest, and no corporate loopholes my brother could exploit. Clara had retained only a life estate granting her the legal right to live out her days in the farmhouse, but the soil itself belonged to me. I held the embossed certified deed in my hands. The physical weight of the paper felt surreal. The raised gold seal caught the fluorescent light overhead. For 6 years, William and Patricia had treated my lack of real estate as a personal failure. Preston had turned my rental status into a recurring punchline, a running joke to elevate his own fragile ego. They thought I was the weak link in the Vance lineage, the one who would never own a single blade of grass. Yet sitting in this quiet municipal room, holding the most valuable asset in our family history, I realized the ultimate joke was on them. I did not just own a house, I owned the very foundation of their assumed superiority. I traced my finger over the signature line. Clara had signed her name with a steady, deliberate hand. She had seen the greed growing in her son and grandson, and she had chosen the quiet, unassuming granddaughter to serve as the ultimate firewall. She knew I would not sell the land, and she knew I would not let Preston destroy it. The silence of the archive room was broken by a sharp buzz in my coat pocket. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with a group message notification. The sender was Savannah, the wife of my brother. Savannah had grown up in a prominent Charleston family, a woman who treated social climbing as an Olympic sport and viewed everyone around her as either a stepping stone or an obstacle. She had married Preston for his perceived trajectory, blissfully ignorant of the hidden debts I had uncovered just hours before. The message was a barrage of celebratory emojis and high-resolution digital invitations. I opened the text. Savannah was boasting to the entire extended family. She announced that Preston had officially scheduled an exclusive investor gala to take place next weekend at a historic country club in downtown Savannah. The purpose of the lavish event was to finalize the syndication for the Oakhaven project. She bragged about the prestigious catering, the string quartet, and the list of elite venture capitalists flying in from Atlanta to sign the final partnership agreements. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the certified deed still resting under my other hand. The juxtaposition of those two pieces of information triggered a cold, precise calculation in my mind. Preston was hosting a high-profile event to solicit investment capital. He was going to stand in front of wealthy individuals and pledge 200 acres of prime Georgia real estate as collateral to back those investments. He was planning to sign legally binding contracts, promising equity in a development project built on land he believed he was going to inherit. But he did not own the land. He never would. By presenting Oakhaven as his own asset to secure financial backing, Preston was crossing a severe legal threshold. He was moving past mere arrogance and stepping directly into the realm of criminal activity. Soliciting funds across state and municipal lines using fraudulent collateral was not a family dispute. It was a monumental federal crime. The conflict had just mutated. It was no longer about a greedy brother trying to bully an elderly woman into signing a power of attorney. It was about a desperate man preparing to defraud multiple financial institutions and private investors to save his sinking company. If he collected a single dollar based on the promise of Oakhaven, the federal authorities would dismantle his life, seize his remaining assets, and hand him a lengthy prison sentence. He was building his own prison, and Savannah was gleefully sending out the invitations. I slowly placed the deed back into the protective folio. I did not reply to Savannah's boastful text. Responding would only give them a false sense of security, or worse, prompt them to change their strategy. I needed to let Preston continue down his chosen path. He was operating under the delusion that he held all the cards, unaware that the game had already concluded 8 months prior. I gathered the documents, my mind already running through the security protocols required to intercept his next move. The trap was set, and I just needed to watch him walk into it. The summons to dinner arrived via a terse phone call from my mother. The venue was a high-end downtown steakhouse known for dimly lit mahogany booths and dry-aged ribeyes that cost more than a standard utility bill. Patricia insisted my attendance was non-negotiable. She claimed Preston needed a united family front to secure a crucial partnership. William had always treated our family dynamic like a corporate public relations campaign. Any hint of internal division signaled weakness to potential financial backers. I was expected to sit quietly, smile, and play the role of the supportive sister. I agreed to attend. I did not mention the certified county deed currently locked inside a fireproof safe in my apartment. I arrived at the restaurant wearing a simple gray sheath dress, blending seamlessly into the background. The private dining room smelled of seared butter and expensive Cabernet. Preston sat at the head of the long table, flanked by two men wearing bespoke suits and sharp, predatory expressions. These were the Atlanta investors. Savannah sat next to Preston, dripping in pearls, radiating a practiced synthetic charm. My parents occupied the opposite side, nodding along to whatever grand vision my brother was spinning. I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table. Preston paused his monologue to acknowledge my arrival. He introduced the investors as Marcus Thorne and David Vance, though David was no relation to us. Marcus was the senior partner of a prominent venture capital firm. He had the cold, evaluating eyes of a man who stripped companies down to their studs and sold them for scrap. Preston was trying desperately to impress him. The waiters distributed heavy crystal glasses and poured expensive vintage wine. Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the crisp white tablecloth. He steered the conversation directly toward me, utilizing my presence to elevate his own status. Hazel Preston began, his voice dripping with condescending warmth. I was just telling Marcus about your little IT job. Information security. I corrected gently, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Right? Preston chuckled, waving a hand as if swatting away a minor detail. Computers. Anyway, Marcus and I were discussing the scaling potential for the Oak Haven project. Once the syndication closes next week, my firm is going to experience exponential growth. We will need an in-house tech support department. I know things have been tight for you living on a single income. I would love to bring you on board. A ground floor opportunity. Call it a family favor. He was offering me a low-level support desk position at a company he was funding through impending federal wire fraud. He framed it as charity, a benevolent lifeline extended to his struggling, unremarkable sister. He wanted Marcus to see him as a generous patriarch, a man who took care of his less fortunate relatives. Savannah leaned across her untouched salad, her smile tight and sharp. You really should take him up on it, Hazel Savannah chimed in. Her voice carried that specific southern cadence designed to disguise an insult as a compliment. It is so sad watching you throw your money away renting that tiny little box in the city. You need to start thinking about your future. Preston is offering you a real career. My mother offered a stiff, approving nod. William looked at me expectantly, waiting for my gratitude. In my profession, when the hostile actor attempts to bait you into a reaction, the most effective countermeasure is total compliance. If you fight back, they raise their defenses. If you surrender, they lower their guard, convinced of their own brilliance. I looked down at my plate, letting my shoulders drop to simulate defeat. I folded my hands in my lap. That is very generous of you, Preston, I said softly. I really appreciate you looking out for me. I know my apartment is not much. It would be nice to have some stability. Preston beamed. His ego swelled, absorbing the validation like a sponge. Marcus Thorne gave an approving nod, clearly pleased by the display of patriarchal control. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by the warm, intoxicating glow of unchecked arrogance. My family went back to their meal fully convinced they had put me in my place. Below the edge of the tablecloth, hidden from their view, I slipped my smartphone out of my purse. I kept my face blank, chewing a piece of asparagus, while my thumb navigated the screen. I ran a silent query on Thorne Capital. Venture capital firms of that magnitude always post their corporate governance and compliance policies publicly to attract institutional investors. I scrolled through their mandated risk assessment protocols. My eyes caught a specific subclause regarding real estate syndication. Thorn Capital operated under a zero-tolerance policy for legal encumbrances. Any asset pledged as collateral had to undergo a rigorous multi-tiered title verification process before a single cent of capital could be transferred. They required a pristine chain of custody. I locked my screen and slid the phone back into my purse. The pebble had dropped into the pond. Now I just needed Preston to throw the boulder. The waiters cleared the salad plates and brought out the main courses. The conversation shifted back to the financial mechanics of the Oakhaven development. Marcus cut into his steak, his demeanor shifting from social pleasantries to ruthless business calculation. "The projections look solid," Preston Marcus stated, pointing his silver fork across the table. "But my underwriting team needs ironclad assurances before we wire the syndicate funds on Friday. 200 acres of prime Buckhead-adjacent land is a strong play. However, generational properties often come with messy probate issues, hidden liens, or lingering trust disputes. I cannot expose my partners to a title fight." The dining room grew very still. William paused with his wineglass halfway to his mouth. Patricia stopped chewing. They both knew Clara had refused to sign the power of attorney. They knew the land was legally vulnerable. They held their breath, waiting to see how Preston would navigate the trap. Preston did not hesitate. He did not deflect or offer a vague reassurance. He leaned back in his chair, exuding total, unshakable confidence. "There are no lingering disputes," Marcus Preston declared, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "The Oakhaven deed is free, clear, and firmly in my holding company name. My grandmother transferred the title to me personally. The land is mine. You will have the unencumbered collateral documents on your desk by Tuesday morning." There it was. He had just stated in front of multiple witnesses that he held the legal title to an asset he did not own. He was using that explicit lie to induce a financial transaction crossing state regulatory lines. It was a verbal commitment to fraud delivered over a plate of dry, aged beef. I felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over my mind. The trap was no longer theoretical. Preston had armed the mechanism himself. I reached for my water glass. Beneath it rested a thick white linen napkin. I pulled a small pen from my pocket and discreetly jotted down the details under the table. Marcus Thorn, Thorn Capital, Tuesday morning collateral transfer. I committed the timeline to memory. I waited 5 minutes, letting the men transition into a discussion about zoning permits and construction timelines. Then I quietly cleared my throat and stood up from my chair. "I am so sorry to interrupt," I said, keeping my tone apologetic and meek. "I have an early shift at the help desk tomorrow, and I really need to catch the train back to my apartment. Thank you so much for dinner, Preston. And thank you again for the job offer. I will definitely think about it." Preston waved his hand dismissively, barely looking up from his conversation with Marcus. "Drive safe, Hazel. We will talk next week." Savannah offered a tight, victorious smile. William and Patricia did not even say goodbye. They were too busy basking in the glow of Preston and his impending fortune. I walked out of the private dining room, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I did not look back. I stepped out into the cool evening air of downtown Atlanta. The city lights reflected off the damp pavement. I opened my hand and looked at the white linen napkin I had taken from the table. The names of the investors and their firm were written in sharp black ink. I folded the napkin carefully and placed it into my pocket. Preston thought he had just secured millions of dollars to save his sinking empire. He had no idea he had just handed me the exact coordinates for his destruction. Preston had painted himself into a corner over a plate of dry, aged beef. By promising the Atlanta investors a pristine title by Tuesday morning, he had activated a ticking clock. He did not possess the deed, and Clara had expressly refused to sign the power of attorney on her front porch. When arrogant men face a barrier they cannot charm or purchase, they invariably resort to force. My brother and my father lacked the physical courage for direct confrontation, so they opted for the coward's weapon of choice. They went to probate court. The legal escalation occurred 3 days after the dinner at the steakhouse. I was sitting in a sunlit room at a premier cardiac rehabilitation center in Sandy Springs, where Clara had been transferred to regain her strength. The facility was quiet, smelling of fresh linen and expensive lavender diffusers. Clara sat in a plush armchair by the window watching the morning traffic glide along the perimeter highway. I stood behind her holding a boar bristle brush gently working through her silver hair. The rhythmic, repetitive motion was deeply soothing. It grounded me, offering a stark contrast to the digital warfare I navigated during my working hours. Clara closed her eyes, leaning into the gentle pull of the brush. We did not need to speak. We shared an unspoken understanding that the storm was currently gathering just beyond the hospital walls. My phone vibrated on the small glass side table. The screen illuminated, displaying a missed call from my father, followed immediately by a new voicemail notification. I did not stop brushing. I simply reached over with my free hand, tapped the screen, and placed the device on speaker. William's voice filled the quiet room. He sounded triumphant, dripping with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just executed a flawless checkmate. Hazel? My father began, his tone patronizing and crisp. I am calling as a courtesy to inform you that we have solved the estate issue. We filed a formal petition in Fulton County Probate Court this morning to have your grandmother declared legally incompetent. Dr. Barrett conducted a thorough medical evaluation and concluded she is no longer fit to manage her own affairs. The judge is reviewing the emergency conservatorship request as we speak. Once I am officially named her legal conservator, I will sign the Oak Haven transfer over to Preston immediately. Do not attempt to interfere. Stay away from the courthouse and stay out of family business you do not understand. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I set the phone back down on the table. Clara opened her eyes and looked at me through the reflection in the window glass. She did not look frightened. She looked deeply, profoundly disappointed in the son she had raised. William viewed his own mother as an obstacle to be liquidated. He had grown up enveloped in the wealth Clara and my grandfather had built, never learning the value of hard work, only learning how to extract value from others. I finished brushing her hair, set the brush aside, and placed a warm blanket over her lap. Then I unzipped my messenger bag and retrieved my laptop. I did not feel a single trace of panic. In information security, when a hostile entity attempts to bypass a firewall using stolen credentials, you do not pull the plug. You trace the origin of the attack. You map the network, identify the corrupted nodes, and gather the digital forensics required to neutralize the threat permanently. My father and brother had just introduced a new variable into the equation: Dr. Barrett. I opened a secure browser and began a deep dive into the public records. Dr. Barrett ran an exclusive concierge medical practice in a high-end suburb north of the city. He catered to wealthy clients who preferred their medical diagnoses to align with their convenience. I accessed the state medical board registry to review his licensing history, noting several past administrative warnings regarding aggressive billing practices. Next, I pulled the probate court docket. Because William had filed for an emergency hearing, the preliminary filings were briefly visible on the county electronic portal before being sealed. I downloaded the PDF of Dr. Barrett's medical affidavit. The physician claimed to have conducted a comprehensive neurological assessment of Clara, concluding she suffered from severe cognitive decline. I ran the document through a metadata extraction tool. Metadata is the hidden architecture of a digital file. It reveals the exact time a document was created, modified, and saved. The timestamp on Dr. Barrett's medical evaluation showed it was authored and finalized on Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Clara had been admitted to the intensive care unit on Tuesday morning. I had been sitting by her bedside the entire day. The only doctor who entered her room was the attending cardiologist. Dr. Barrett had evaluated Clara for exactly 5 minutes, standing in the doorway of her hospital room while she was asleep, before returning to his office to draft a fraudulent legal document stripping her of her autonomy. But a corrupt medical evaluation was not enough to spring the trap. I needed the financial tether linking the physician directly to Preston. People who execute fraudulent schemes invariably leave a paper trail because they believe their wealth shields them from scrutiny. I shifted my focus to the municipal zoning portal. Real estate developers are required to submit preliminary expenditure budgets to the City Planning Commission when applying for subdivision permits. Preston had proudly announced the Oak Haven project to his investors, meaning he had already filed his early expense reports to secure the necessary zoning variances. I downloaded the public ledger for his primary development holding company. I scanned hundreds of line items, filtering the data for recent high-dollar transactions. My eyes tracked down the columns, sorting past surveying fees, architectural retainers, and legal costs. Then I found it. It was buried on page 14 of the municipal filing, a line item categorized under environmental site consultation. The transaction was a direct disbursement for $50,000. The payee was a tertiary holding group registered in the state of Delaware. I copied the holding group's corporate registry number and ran a cross-reference search through the Federal Business Database. The registered agent for the Delaware Shell Company matched the primary billing address of Dr. Barrett's concierge medical practice. The timeline locked into place with devastating precision. Preston's development firm had wired $50,000 to the doctor's holding company exactly 2 days before William filed the petition for incompetence. They had not sought a medical opinion. They had purchased a verdict. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the quiet rehab room. I had just documented felony bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and perjury, all mapped out through publicly available data. I did not need to raise my voice or argue with my father. I just needed to let the evidence speak. I began compiling the raw data into a clean forensic binder. I printed the metadata logs from the probate affidavit, the municipal expenditure reports from the zoning board, and the corporate registry linking the doctor to the shell company. I slid each document into a clear plastic sleeve, organizing the timeline with clinical efficiency. This physical binder was the antidote to their arrogance. It was a tangible record of their crimes ready to be deployed the moment they crossed the point of no return. I closed my laptop and looked over at Clara. She was resting peacefully, trusting me to guard the gates. The probate court would not grant an emergency conservatorship without a formal hearing, meaning we had a window of time before William gained any legal authority. However, I knew my brother. Preston lacked discipline. He was too desperate to wait for the slow gears of the legal system to turn. He had promised the Atlanta investors a clear path to development, and his creditors were closing in. He would not wait for the judge to rule. He would attempt to seize the physical property to maintain the illusion of control. I slipped the forensic binder into my bag. The digital trap was fully constructed. Now I had to secure the physical perimeter because I knew Preston was about to make his next reckless move. My phone vibrated against the glass surface of my desk early the next morning. The notification did not come from a family group chat or a frantic phone call. It was a silent, automated alert from an application buried deep in my device. Anticipating that my brother might attempt to seize the physical property before securing legal clearance, I had spent a quiet afternoon the previous week installing a network of cellular motion cameras along the perimeter of the Oak Haven estate. I placed them high in the branches of the ancient sweet gum trees, angled downward to capture the wrought iron gates and the main access roads. I opened the application and pulled up the live video feed. 3 white pickup trucks were idling in the gravel driveway just past the main entrance. Men wearing neon yellow safety vests were climbing out of the cabs, unlatching the tailgates, and hauling out heavy wooden tripods and expensive optical instruments. They were surveyors. Preston was not waiting for the probate judge to rule on the fraudulent incompetence petition. He was pushing forward, ordering the topographical mapping required to grade the soil for his luxury subdivisions. He intended to show his investors that ground was already being broken. In my youth, I spent countless summer afternoons sitting in the old carriage house on that property, teaching myself basic coding languages, while Preston was out in the pastures, shooting clay pigeons and breaking windows. Oak Haven was the only place I ever felt anchored. Seeing those trucks trespass on my land felt like a physical intrusion, a breach in a secure network that required an immediate, unyielding countermeasure. I grabbed my keys, descended to the parking garage, and navigated my nondescript sedan through the morning traffic. I did not drive up to the main gate. Instead, I parked half a mile down the rural highway, tucking my vehicle behind a dense grove of weeping willows, where the property line met the county road. Through the trees, I had a clear line of sight to the surveying crew. They were already driving wooden stakes into the damp Georgia soil, with heavy mallets tying neon pink flagging tape to mark the future bulldozer routes. A sudden surge of protective anger flared in my chest, but I quickly suppressed it. Emotion is a liability in a security crisis. If I marched onto the field and presented the certified county deed to the foreman, the surveyors would leave immediately. But the foreman would also call Preston. Preston would realize he did not own the land, and he would cancel the impending investor syndication gala. He would avoid signing the fraudulent contracts, thereby escaping the federal wire fraud charges that would guarantee his permanent ruin. I needed a proxy. I had to halt the physical destruction of Oakhaven using a method untraceable to Hazel Vance. I reclined my driver's seat, rested my laptop against the steering wheel, and connected to an encrypted mobile hotspot. I navigated to the corporate registry portal for the Georgia Secretary of State. Establishing a limited liability company requires a nominal filing fee and a basic internet connection. It does not require a physical office or a list of managing members if you utilize a registered agent service to mask your identity. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Within 10 minutes, I registered a holding entity named Ironwood Title Management. I paid the expedited filing fee, generating a legitimate state-recognized corporate charter. Next, I opened a high-resolution photo I had captured of the white pickup trucks. I zoomed in on the driver's side door, reading the company logo, Apex Topography. I ran a quick query on the surveying firm, locating the email address and fax number for their corporate legal department in Atlanta. I opened a blank document and drafted a formal cease and desist order. I did not use threatening language. I used the cold, paralyzing syntax of corporate liability. The letter stated that Ironwood Title Management represented stakeholders in an active, highly contested probate dispute regarding the Oakhaven parcel. It formally notified Apex Topography that their client Preston Vance possessed no legal authority to authorize work on the premises. I added a final, devastating clause warning that any further physical alteration of the land would result in immediate litigation against Apex Topography for trespassing and property damage. I attached the filed probate docket number corresponding to my father's fraudulent incompetence petition, adding a layer of undeniable legitimacy to the threat. I routed the document through an anonymous proxy server and transmitted it directly to the surveying firm. I closed my laptop and looked through the windshield. 10 minutes passed. The men in the field continued their work, ignorant of the digital strike traveling through their corporate hierarchy. Then the foreman stopped hammering a wooden stake. He reached toward his belt and unclipped a two-way radio. He listened for a moment, his brow furrowing. He grabbed his cell phone and stepped away from the crew, waving his hands in a heated, silent argument with someone at his home office. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. The foreman ended the call, turned toward his men, and shouted a single command. The surveyors froze. They looked confused, but they followed orders. They began pulling the wooden stakes out of my soil, tossing them into the beds of the pickup trucks. They collapsed their expensive tripods, slammed the tailgates shut, and climbed back into the cabs. I watched from the shadows of the weeping willows as the 3 trucks reversed out of the driveway and sped away down the asphalt, leaving the estate quiet and untouched. The air settled. The threat was neutralized. It was a flawless, silent victory, achieved without raising my voice, without stepping foot on the grass, and without tipping my hand to the enemy. I put my car in gear and drove toward the Cardiac Rehabilitation Center in Sandy Springs. Clara needed to know her perimeter was secure. When I walked through the sliding glass doors of the medical facility, I did not find a quiet lobby. I found Preston. He was pacing the carpeted reception area. His tie loosened, his face flushed with a furious, uncontainable red hue. He was holding his smartphone in a white knuckle grip, muttering harsh curses to himself. He spotted me walking toward the elevator banks and changed his trajectory, marching directly into my path. "Where have you been?" Preston demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet lobby. He did not wait for an answer. He leaned in close, attempting to use his physical size to force me into submission. Someone just filed a bogus corporate injunction against my surveying firm, he hissed, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for hidden spies. The foreman pulled the entire crew off Oakhaven because their legal department got spooked by a cease and desist order citing the probate case. I maintained a blank, unreadable expression. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides. "Oh," I said smoothly. "That sounds complicated." Preston scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It is not complicated. It is pathetic. It has to be Old Man Davis Clara's ancient estate attorney. That fossil must have caught wind of the conservatorship petition and decided to throw a wrench in the gears by filing a blind injunction to delay the topographical maps." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and raw panic. He jabbed a finger toward my shoulder. "Have you been talking to him, Hazel? Did you go running to Clara's lawyer to try and stop my development?" I looked him dead in the eye. In the realm of security analysis, deception is often unnecessary when the truth serves as the perfect camouflage. Preston assumed an elderly, slow-moving estate lawyer was the only entity capable of challenging his authority. He believed I was nothing more than an obedient, useless sister living in a rented box, incapable of executing a sophisticated corporate maneuver. I held his furious gaze without blinking. "I have not spoken to her lawyer at all," I answered truthfully. Preston stared at me for a long, heavy second. His shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. He let out a harsh, derisive laugh, convinced of his own superior intelligence. "Of course you have not," he sneered, straightening his tie. "You would not even know what to say to a real attorney. It does not matter anyway. A phantom holding company and a senile lawyer will not stop the Oakhaven syndication. The investors are arriving in Savannah this weekend, and I am going to bury anyone who gets in my way." He turned his back on me and stormed out the front doors, marching toward his luxury SUV to fight a ghost. He was walking directly into a digital guillotine, fully confident he was invincible, completely blind to the architect standing right behind him. The countdown to the investor gala began with a silent notification on my secondary monitor. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 4 days before my family planned to celebrate their unearned triumph in Savannah. Preston had grown tired of waiting. The phantom legal injunction I had filed against his surveying crew had rattled him. He recognized that his timeline was slipping, and a slipping timeline meant his creditors would soon begin seizing his legitimate assets. To prevent his financial collapse, he needed to lock in the venture capital from Marcus Thorne immediately. In the financial sector, securing a multi-million-dollar syndicated loan requires a specific sequence of public filings. I tracked Preston through the Georgia Secretary of State corporate portal. At 9 o'clock in the morning, his legal team submitted a Uniform Commercial Code financing statement. In the banking industry, this document is commonly known as a UCC-1. It is a standardized public notice declaring that a creditor possesses a secured interest in the property of a debtor. I downloaded the submitted PDF and read the attached schedule of assets. Preston had officially listed the 200 acres of Oakhaven as the primary collateral guaranteeing the loan from Thorne Capital. I stared at the glowing screen, feeling the cold, rigid finality of the document. By signing and filing the UCC-1, Preston was no longer just a greedy relative trying to bully an elderly woman into giving up her home. He had crossed a definitive legal threshold. He had submitted a sworn declaration to a government agency under penalty of perjury, stating that his holding company held the clear and unencumbered title to the historic estate. It was a fabricated claim designed to induce a massive transfer of wealth across state and municipal banking lines. Preston had just committed felony bank fraud, and the evidence was now a matter of permanent public record. The digital trap was locked. I printed the UCC-1 statement and turned in my chair to add the fresh document to the forensic binder resting on my glass coffee table. Before I could open the heavy black cover, a sharp, rhythmic knock echoed through my apartment. I walked to the front door and checked the security camera feed on my phone. Savannah stood in the hallway. She was wearing a tailored white tweed blazer and oversized sunglasses, tapping her designer heel impatiently against the concrete floor. Savannah was raised in a historic Charleston mansion where the primary export was judgment. She viewed human relationships as a rigid caste system. She had married my brother because the Vance name provided access to the elite social circles she craved. She tolerated my existence only because acknowledging my failures made her feel vastly superior. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Savannah pushed past me without an invitation, bringing a wave of expensive floral perfume into my quiet sanctuary. She held a thick plastic garment bag draped over her arm. "I do not have much time," Hazel Savannah announced, removing her sunglasses and scanning my minimalist living room with a look of undisguised pity. "Preston is finalizing the catering menu for the gala, and your mother asked me to intervene regarding your wardrobe." She walked over to my couch and dropped the garment bag onto the cushions. She unzipped the plastic to reveal a dull mustard yellow dress made of a heavy synthetic blend. It was a garment deliberately chosen to be unflattering. It was the kind of dress designed to make the wearer fade into the background, ensuring they did not draw the eye away from the true stars of the evening. "We are hosting some of the most influential venture capitalists in the Southeast on Friday," Savannah explained, her tone dripping with false maternal concern. "We need to present an image of flawless prosperity. Your mother and I discussed it, and we agreed that your usual aesthetic is a bit too austere for an event of this caliber. We cannot have you looking like a transient while Preston signs the partnership agreements. Wear this. It is conservative. It will help you blend in." I looked at the cheap fabric. My family was so consumed by the surface-level optics of wealth that they poured their energy into controlling what I wore, entirely neglecting to control the legal integrity of their own investments. I turned my attention to the glass coffee table. The black forensic binder sat exactly 2 inches from where Savannah rested her expensive leather handbag. Inside that binder were the metadata logs proving her husband had bribed a doctor, the financial spreadsheets proving his company was bankrupt, and the public filings proving he was currently committing a federal crime. The blueprint for her impending social and financial ruin was sitting right in front of her. Savannah did not even glance at the binder. She assumed that because I lived in a leased apartment and worked at a computer, I was incapable of generating anything of consequence. Her arrogance rendered her completely blind to the threat in the room. I looked back at Savannah. I relaxed my shoulders and offered a soft, placid smile. "Thank you, Savannah," I said, keeping my voice gentle and submissive. "That is very thoughtful of you and my mother. I know how important this weekend is for Preston. I will make sure I do not stand out." Savannah beamed, her posture straightened, thrilled by my easy compliance. She believed she had successfully dominated the awkward sister, securing her perfect family portrait for the country club photographers. "Good," Savannah said, picking up her handbag. "Preston is under a lot of pressure right now. The least you can do is support him properly. We will see you in Savannah on Friday." She let herself out, the heavy apartment door clicking shut behind her. I stood in the silence of my living room for a moment, letting the scent of her perfume dissipate. I walked over to the couch, picked up the mustard yellow dress, and dropped it directly into the hallway trash bin. I did not need a costume for the gala. I already had a tailored navy suit pressed and waiting in my closet. I returned to my desk and retrieved the white linen napkin I had taken from the steakhouse days earlier. The name Marcus Thorne and the name of his venture capital firm were written in sharp black ink. Preston had accelerated the timeline by filing the UCC-1. It was time for me to introduce the final variable into the equation. I booted up a specialized software program designed to route voice communications through a series of encrypted international proxy servers. In information security, anonymity is a basic fundamental function. You can mask your digital origins so thoroughly that even sophisticated corporate tracing algorithms will bounce back empty-handed. I dialed the main corporate switchboard for Thorne Capital in Atlanta. When the automated directory answered, I bypassed the executive suites and routed my call directly to the Compliance and Risk Management Division. A man with a deep professional voice answered the line. "Thorne Capital Compliance, how can I help you?" I employed a vocal modulation filter that lowered the pitch of my voice, stripping away any identifying cadence. I did not introduce myself. I delivered my message with cold, clinical precision. Your firm is preparing to wire syndication funds to Preston Vance for the Oak Haven project this Friday, I stated. There was a brief pause on the line. The compliance officer immediately recognized the project name. Excuse me, who is calling? You operate under a strict policy against encumbered collateral. I continued, ignoring his question. Preston Vance filed a public financing statement this morning pledging 200 acres of Buckhead real estate. He does not own that land. The deed he presented to your underwriting team is invalid. The compliance officer shifted his tone from polite confusion to sharp attention. This is a very serious allegation. I need your name and your affiliation with the Vance firm. I am an interested party, ensuring your firm does not become an accessory to wire fraud, I replied smoothly. Preston Vance does not possess the title. Do not authorize the wire transfer based on digital copies or verbal assurances. Demand to see the original certified county deed in person before your senior partner signs the final agreement at the gala. If he cannot produce the original document, you will know exactly what kind of man you are funding. I terminated the connection before the compliance officer could speak another word. I cleared the routing cache and wiped the application data, erasing the digital footprint of the call entirely. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window of my modest apartment. The sky over Midtown was clear and bright. Preston was busy planning a celebration for a victory he had not earned. Savannah was busy picking out floral centerpieces. William and Patricia were busy bragging to their friends about their son. None of them realized the foundation beneath their feet had already turned to dust. The board was set, the pieces were locked into place, and Preston was walking willingly toward a public execution. The morning of the Savannah Historical Society Gala arrived with a flurry of digital noise. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the kitchen counter, vibrating with a stream of group text messages from my mother. Patricia was in a state of manic euphoria. She sent photographs of her hair appointments, her manicured nails, and the custom-tailored tuxedo my father had purchased for the occasion. William was busy calling every member of his country club, boasting about his son's visionary development project. They were intoxicated by their own perceived success. My family treated wealth as a competitive sport, and tonight was their championship match. They were glowing with unearned pride, ready to present Preston to the Southern elite as a conquering hero. I ignored the text messages. I stood in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the hum of my servers, engaging in my own specialized form of preparation. Today was not a social event. It was a corporate tribunal. I cleared my glass desk and wiped down the surface, establishing a pristine workspace. I retrieved the original embossed deed to Oak Haven from my fireproof safe. The thick cardstock felt substantial in my hands, carrying the weight of generational soil and my grandmother's quiet defiance. I placed the document on the scanning bed of my high-resolution printer. I did not need to alter a single pixel. The truth requires no manipulation. I initiated a secure print run, producing 3 high-quality copies of the certified county deed. The machine whirred, sliding the warm pages into the output tray. Next, I printed the metadata extraction logs. These pages map the digital timeline of the concierge doctor, proving the medical affidavit declaring Clara incompetent was drafted mere hours after a $50,000 bribe cleared his holding company bank account. Finally, I printed the Uniform Commercial Code financing statements. The UCC-1 filings served as the legal anchor of my trap. They demonstrated under penalty of perjury that Preston Vance had pledged land he did not own to secure venture capital. I arranged the documents with clinical precision. I slid 1 copy of the deed, 1 copy of the bribery metadata, and 1 copy of the fraudulent financing statement into a sleek, matte black presentation folder. I repeated the process 2 more times, assembling 3 identical dossiers. These folders did not look like family drama. They looked like board-level intelligence briefs. They represented a definitive structural collapse of my brother's entire financial existence. I stacked the 3 folders on my desk. The arsenal was ready. I walked into my bedroom to prepare my uniform. Savannah had dropped off that hideous synthetic dress, expecting me to wear it like a badge of submission. She wanted me to look like a grateful, unremarkable peasant, allowed into the castle for a single night. She wanted me to blend into the floral arrangements while Preston commanded the room. I bypassed the casual attire in my closet and reached for a garment bag tucked in the very back. I unzipped the nylon cover and pulled out a sharply tailored navy blue suit. I had purchased this suit 2 years ago for a keynote presentation at a cybersecurity conference in Washington. The fabric was a structured wool blend. The lines were sharp, clean, and entirely unforgiving. I dressed methodically. I buttoned the crisp white cotton shirt and slipped into the tailored jacket. I stood before the full-length mirror and studied my reflection. I did not look like a Southern belle ready for a society pageant. I looked like an information security analyst stepping into a hostile boardroom. I looked like a woman who hunted data discrepancies for a living. The suit was my armor. It projected authority, competence, and a profound lack of patience for theatrics. I gathered my keys, picked up the 3 black folders, and locked my apartment door. Before merging onto the southbound interstate toward the coast, I altered my route. I drove north to the Cardiac Rehabilitation Center in Sandy Springs. I needed to see the architect of this entire operation before I executed her final sequence. The hospital corridors were quiet during the mid-morning hours. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to Clara's room. The sterile scent of antiseptic greeted me, but the atmosphere inside felt remarkably different than it had earlier in the week. Clara was not lying in bed. She was sitting upright in a structured chair near the window, dressed in a soft cashmere sweater instead of a hospital gown. The color had returned to her cheeks. Her silver hair was brushed back neatly, and her eyes carried that familiar piercing clarity. She looked sharper and more present than she had in months. The minor stroke had temporarily weakened her physical body, but her mind remained an impenetrable fortress. She turned her head as I entered the room. Her gaze dropped to the tailored navy suit, and a faint, knowing smile touched the corners of her mouth. She recognized the uniform. She knew exactly what today represented. I walked over and sat on the edge of her mattress, placing the 3 black folders on the bedside table. I did not need to explain the contents. Clara understood the mechanics of power better than anyone in our lineage. She had watched her son and her grandson twist that power into something toxic, something built on deception and unearned entitlement. She had chosen me to act as the corrective measure. I took her frail hand in mine. Her skin was cool, but her grip was surprisingly firm. "They are signing the syndication contracts tonight in Savannah," I told her quietly. "The investors are flying in. Preston is going to stand on a stage and pledge Oakhaven to secure his bridge loans." Clara looked out the window. The morning traffic moved in a steady, oblivious stream along the highway. She had spent 60 years cultivating the soil of that estate. She had buried a husband there. She had raised children there. She knew the exact price of legacy, and she knew Preston was trying to sell it for cheap leverage. She turned her gaze back to me. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, crystalline resolve. She squeezed my fingers, her voice steady and clear, devoid of any hesitation. "Take the house down, Hazel," she said. I nodded once. I picked up the folders, squeezed her hand in return, and walked out of the room. I navigated my sedan onto Interstate 75, pointing the hood south toward the Georgia coastline. The drive to Savannah would take nearly 4 hours. The cabin of my car was silent save for the rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement. I did not turn on the radio. I let the quiet envelop me, using the time to run through the upcoming variables in my mind. The 3 black folders rode in the passenger seat beside me. They sat there like silent passengers holding the undeniable truth that would soon shatter a lifetime of manufactured prestige. Every mile marker that passed brought me closer to the historic downtown district, closer to the crystal chandeliers, and closer to the moment Preston Vance would realize his empire was built on a fault line. The tension wound tighter with every passing hour. I watched the landscape shift from the sprawling urban sprawl of Atlanta to the dense, humid pine forests of the southern counties. My family was waiting for me. They were expecting the quiet, obedient sister to arrive and stand in the shadows. They had no idea I was bringing the storm directly to their front door. The Savannah Historical Society occupied a restored 19th century armory situated in the heart of the historic district. Walking through the arched mahogany doors felt exactly like stepping into a gilded terrarium. The air hung thick with the scent of crushed magnolias, expensive botanical gin, and the cloying sweetness of generational arrogance. The grand ballroom was an expanding sea of black tuxedos and trailing silk gowns. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, fractured light over the attendees, illuminating a curated collection of Southern elites who treated pedigree as a currency and viewed outsiders with polite disdain. I handed my trench coat to the coat check attendant, keeping a firm grip on the 3 black presentation folders tucked under my arm. In my tailored navy suit, I did not match the aesthetic of the room. I did not look like a socialite attending a charity gala. I looked like a federal auditor walking into a corrupt bank. That was precisely the intention. I stepped into the perimeter of the ballroom and let the heavy oak doors click shut behind me. As a security analyst, I never rush into the center of a network. I stay on the edge, mapping the pathways, identifying the active nodes, and locating the vulnerabilities. I scanned the room with clinical detachment. Waiters glided through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. String musicians played a soft classical arrangement on a raised platform near the back, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to an evening built entirely on fraud. It did not take long to locate my family. They were holding court near the grand stage, positioned strategically to ensure maximum visibility from every angle of the room. Preston stood at the epicenter of their fabricated universe. He wore a velvet dinner jacket and held a low-ball glass, projecting an aura of untouchable dominance. He was shaking hands with Marcus Thorne and the other Atlanta investors, slapping them on the shoulders, leaning in to share private jokes. My mother, Patricia, hovered nearby, draped in emerald satin. She was deep in conversation with the wives of several local politicians, gesturing toward Preston with a look of manufactured maternal devotion. They were all playing their roles flawlessly, maintaining the illusion of a wealthy, unified dynasty preparing to expand their empire. I remained in the shadows near a marble pillar, observing the performance. Preston was desperate. His holding company was days away from total insolvency, yet he stood there laughing, convinced his fraudulent collateral maneuver was going to save him. He had built a house of cards, placed it on a fault line, and invited the wealthiest people in the state to admire the architecture. Before I could move closer to the stage, a sharp voice cut through the ambient hum of the ballroom. Hazel. I turned. Savannah marched toward me, her heels striking the polished hardwood floor like weapons. She wore a cascading white gown that looked uncomfortably close to a wedding dress, clearly intended to make her the focal point of the evening. Her smile was tight, brittle, and entirely devoid of warmth. She stopped 2 feet away, her eyes raking over my structured wool blazer and crisp collar with visible disgust. "What are you wearing?" Savannah hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the nearby guests. "I brought you a dress. A proper dress. We specifically discussed this." Savannah treated social conformity as a moral imperative. She had grown up in a family where keeping up appearances was more important than maintaining actual solvency. To her, my refusal to wear the cheap mustard yellow garment was not just a fashion error. It was an act of treason against the family image. I did not apologize. I did not shrink back. I held the 3 black folders securely against my side and met her furious gaze. "The dress you provided did not fit the occasion," I replied, my tone flat and unyielding. "It was selected to ensure you did not embarrass us in front of the elite." Savannah spat, her composure cracking under the weight of her own vanity. "Preston is finalizing the most important deal of his career tonight. He has Marcus Thorne ready to sign the syndication paperwork right after the presentation. You showing up in a business suit makes you look like a secretary. You are trying to ruin his night on purpose." I looked past her shoulder, watching Preston hand a fresh drink to the lead investor. He was glowing with false confidence. "I am not here to ruin anything, Savannah," I said softly, delivering the words with surgical precision. "I am just here to ensure the investors get the full picture." She scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "We'll stand in the back. Do not speak to Marcus or the partners. Just blend in and let Preston handle the business. She spun on her heel and marched back toward the center of the room, oblivious to the reality that she had just ordered the executioner to wait patiently for the guillotine to drop. I shifted my position, moving along the perimeter wall until I stood parallel to the primary gathering of my family. From this vantage point, I could hear their conversations clearly over the string quartet. My father, William, was holding a fresh glass of champagne surrounded by a circle of aging country club members. He raised his glass, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. To generational legacy, William announced, his voice projecting authority. We do not just build houses, we build history. The Vance name means something in this state. It means roots. It means stability. Tonight, my son proves that we honor the past by developing the future. The men around him chuckled and raised their glasses in agreement. I watched my father drink, feeling a profound sense of irony wash over me. William spoke of legacy while actively attempting to declare his own mother incompetent to steal her home. He spoke of stability while his son was drowning in hidden debt. They worshipped the concept of family honor while routinely destroying the actual family members who refused to conform to their toxic standards. They did not know what legacy meant. Clara knew. Legacy was planting trees you would never sit under. Legacy was protecting the vulnerable from the greedy. Legacy was executing a secret deed transfer to ensure a corrupt grandson could not pave over 60 years of history. A sudden shift in the atmosphere pulled my attention away from my father. The string musicians ceased playing their instruments. The ambient lighting in the ballroom dimmed, casting long shadows across the walls. A hushed anticipation rippled through the crowd of tuxedo-clad investors and satin-draped socialites. A man in a sleek black suit stepped onto the grand stage and tapped the microphone. A sharp feedback whine signaled the beginning of the main event. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming through the sound system. If I could direct your attention to the front. We are here tonight to celebrate a monumental leap forward in Georgia real estate development. To guide us through this vision, please welcome the founder and driving force behind the Oak Haven project, Mr. Preston Vance. The ballroom erupted into enthusiastic applause. Preston practically bounded up the stairs, his face glowing under the bright stage lights. He adjusted his jacket, exuding the easy, practiced charm of a man who believed the world owed him everything he desired. As he took the microphone, the towering projection screens behind him flickered to life. Colossal architectural renderings illuminated the dark room. The digital blueprints displayed sprawling luxury estates, manicured lawns, and wide paved roads, carving directly through the historic pastures I had wandered as a child. Preston smiled widely, looking down at Marcus Thorne and the venture capital team seated at the VIP table, situated directly in front of the stage. He was preparing to deliver the pitch of his life. He was ready to publicly solicit the final signatures that would trigger a multi-million-dollar wire transfer from the Atlanta firm into his depleted corporate accounts. He held the microphone close, opening his mouth to speak. The trap was officially sprung. I adjusted my grip on the 3 black folders, stepped away from the shadows of the marble pillar, and began walking toward the front of the room. The master of ceremonies stepped back from the podium, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Preston stood at the center of the grand stage, bathed in the crisp white glow of the overhead spotlights. Behind him, the digital screens transitioned through vivid, high-resolution renderings of the Oak Haven project. He held the microphone with practiced ease, pacing slowly, projecting the polished charisma of a man who believed destiny owed him a favor. He spoke of the Vance family legacy, weaving a fabricated narrative of stewardship and generational sacrifice. He painted a picture of our ancestors taming the wild Georgia terrain, conveniently ignoring the fact that our grandfather had purchased the parcel from a commercial timber company in the 1960s. Preston possessed a unique talent for rewriting history to elevate his own status. He gestured toward the screen, highlighting the proposed location of the clubhouse and the private equestrian trails. "This is not just real estate," Preston declared, his voice echoing through the silent, captivated ballroom. "This is my heritage. I spent my childhood walking those pastures. I know every inch of that soil. And tonight I am honored to share my vision for its future." We are not just building homes, we are cementing a dynasty. The audience offered polite, appreciative murmurs. Men in tailored tuxedos nodded in approval. Women in silk gowns raised their champagne flutes. They were buying the performance, eager to associate themselves with a winning venture. Preston turned his attention to the VIP table positioned directly below the stage. Marcus Thorne and his team of venture capitalists sat there flanked by legal associates holding leather-bound portfolios. To bring a vision of this scale to life requires the right partners. Preston continued, offering a magnanimous smile. Men who understand the value of historic land and the security of a pristine, unencumbered asset. Marcus, I would like to invite you up here to join me. Let us make this partnership official. The room erupted into applause. A symbolic signing at a society gala is a calculated maneuver. It applies immense social pressure to the investors, locking them into a public commitment before the final bank transfers clear the next morning. Marcus Thorne stood adjusting his suit jacket and offered a confident wave to the crowd. A waiter rushed forward with a silver tray bearing a document and an expensive fountain pen. I did not wait for Marcus to reach the stairs. I stepped out from the shadows of the marble pillar. The heels of my shoes struck the polished hardwood floor, establishing a steady, deliberate rhythm that cut through the fading applause. I walked past the perimeter tables, bypassing the floral centerpieces and the ice sculptures. Savannah saw me first. Her eyes widened, her mouth forming a silent reprimand. She reached out to grab my arm, intending to drag me back into the background, but I sidestepped her grasp without breaking my stride. I moved with the focused, unyielding momentum of a security protocol initiating a system lockdown. My father realized what was happening a moment later. William lunged forward from his chair, his face contorting into a mask of sudden, sharp alarm. He opened his mouth to order me away, to exert the parental authority he used to control every aspect of our lives. But he was too late. I was already past him, crossing the final stretch of open floor toward the VIP table. Preston watched me approach from his elevated position on the stage. His practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine annoyance. He lowered the microphone slightly, assuming I was stepping forward to fix a technical issue or deliver a message from the event coordinators. He still viewed me as the obedient, useful sister incapable of independent action. I stopped at the edge of the VIP table, standing directly between Marcus Thorne and the staircase leading up to Preston. I did not look at my brother. I looked directly at the lead investor. I held the 3 black folders securely against my side. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout to command the space. I used the clear, penetrating tone of a professional delivering critical data. Before any funds are transferred, compliance requires a verification of title, I said, projecting my words just loud enough for the front tables and the stage microphones to pick up the sound. The ballroom fell into a sudden, confused hush. The ambient chatter ceased. The attendees shifted in their seats, exchanging bewildered glances. This was a significant deviation from the printed program. In the rigid hierarchy of Southern society, interrupting a formal business proceeding was a severe breach of etiquette. Preston gripped his microphone tighter. The color rose in his cheeks. He recognized that the narrative was slipping from his control, and he defaulted to his primary defense mechanism. He tried to diminish me. He forced a loud, dismissive chuckle, gesturing toward me with a sweep of his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," my younger sister Hazel Preston announced, injecting a heavy dose of patronizing warmth into his tone. She works in technical support, so she is a bit obsessed with protocol. I think she might have enjoyed the open bar a little too much this evening. Hazel's sweetheart, the underwriting team has already reviewed the preliminary paperwork. You can head back to your seat now. We have everything under control. He expected the crowd to laugh with him. He expected me to flush with embarrassment, drop my gaze, and retreat to the shadows like a chastised child. He relied on the assumption that my fear of public humiliation would override my logic. He was wrong. I did not argue with him. I did not waste my breath defending my sobriety or my profession. When a hostile entity attempts to manipulate reality in a public forum, you do not debate their narrative. You introduce irrefutable evidence. I unlatched the first black presentation folder. I withdrew the heavy embossed county deed. The thick cardstock felt crisp and cool against my fingertips. I stepped forward and laid the document directly onto the white tablecloth right beside the silver tray holding Preston's symbolic contract. I smoothed my hand over the paper, ensuring the gold municipal seal and the notarized signatures were fully visible under the chandelier lighting. I looked up at Preston, my expression entirely blank, devoid of any sisterly affection or fear. "The land belongs to me," I stated, my voice carrying the unshakable weight of a verified fact. "It has belonged to me for 8 months." The words echoed through the silent armory. They hung in the air, sharp and inescapable. Preston froze. His jaw went slack. The microphone rested near his chest, amplifying his sudden ragged intake of breath. He stared at the piece of paper on the table, his brain struggling to process the impossible data I had just introduced into his reality. He opened his mouth, searching for a witty deflection, but the requisite arrogance had evaporated. Marcus Thorne did not laugh. He did not look at Preston. He remembered the anonymous phone call he had received days prior, the warning about encumbered collateral and fraudulent assets. The seed of doubt I had planted had already taken root, and now the harvest was sitting right in front of him. Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his tuxedo jacket and retrieved a pair of silver reading glasses. He slipped them onto his face with slow, deliberate precision. He ignored the hundreds of guests watching him. He ignored the grand architectural renderings glowing on the screens. He leaned over the table and read the certified deed. I watched his eyes track across the legal syntax. I watched him absorb the date of execution, the irrevocable transfer clauses, and the unmistakable signature of Clara Vance, conveying the property exclusively to Hazel Vance. The physical reaction was instantaneous. The blood drained from Marcus Thorne's face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. The relaxed posture of a confident venture capitalist vanished, replaced by the rigid, terrifying realization that he had nearly authorized a wire transfer based on a fabricated premise. He had stood inches away from becoming a primary victim in a multi-million-dollar crime. Marcus slowly stood up straight. He removed his reading glasses and folded them with a sharp, decisive click. He did not say a word to me. He looked up at the stage. He looked at Preston Vance not as a promising young developer, but as a severe legal liability. The silence in the grand ballroom transformed. It was no longer a hush of polite confusion. It became a sudden, suffocating vacuum. 200 members of the Southern elite sat frozen in their gilded chairs, watching the golden child of the Vance dynasty shatter in real time. The illusion of his superiority, cultivated over a lifetime of unearned privilege and performative wealth, dissolved into nothing but ink and paper resting on a white tablecloth. The spell broke. Preston blinked, the polished veneer of the successful developer fracturing into a portrait of raw panic. He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a sharp thud, sending a piercing whine of feedback through the towering speakers. Guests covered their ears, but Preston ignored the deafening noise. He scrambled down the short wooden staircase, his expensive velvet dinner jacket catching awkwardly on the brass handrail. He lunged across the short distance separating us and reached for the embossed document resting on the white tablecloth. "That is a forgery!" Preston shouted, his voice cracking under the strain of his mounting terror. He snatched the thick paper, holding it up high, as if exposing a counterfeit bill to the room. "She printed this in her apartment. Do not listen to her. She is trying to ruin this deal out of pure jealousy." I did not try to wrestle the paper back from his trembling hands. I stepped back, maintaining a perimeter of total clinical detachment. When a compromised network node begins to fail, you do not try to repair it while it is actively burning. You isolate the damage and let the corrupt system crash. Preston was crashing. He waved the certified deed in the air, but Marcus Thorne and the other venture capitalists were no longer looking at him. They were looking at me. I reached under my arm and unlatched the remaining 2 black presentation folders. The smooth matte covers felt cool against my palms. With a measured, deliberate motion, I opened them and slid the contents down the length of the VIP table, distributing the evidence directly to the underwriting associates seated beside Marcus. Included is the UCC1 filing. where Preston Vance pledged an asset he does not own as collateral alongside the metadata, proving his LLC bribed a physician to declare the true owner, Clara Vance, incompetent to cover his tracks. I stated the facts, keeping my tone devoid of anger or triumph. I spoke with the steady cadence of an auditor delivering a terminal financial diagnosis. The words landed like heavy stones in the silent room. The conflict had just mutated, shifting rapidly from a localized family dispute into the realm of legal obliteration. I watched the underwriting attorneys scramble to read the provided documents. They recognized the official municipal stamps. They understood the digital timestamps tracing a $50,000 payout to a concierge doctor just 48 hours before a probate petition was filed. The paper trail was pristine, undeniable, and fatal. Before the attorneys could advise their senior partner on the staggering liability sitting in front of them, a new disruption erupted from the crowd. William burst through the line of bewildered onlookers. My father was a man who had spent his entire life curating an image of effortless Southern aristocracy, relying on golf course handshakes and country club exclusivity to mask a profound lack of substance. He viewed reputation as his most valuable currency, and I was currently bankrupting him in front of his peers. His face was flushed a dark, furious crimson. The veins in his neck stood out in stark relief against his starched white collar. He marched directly toward me, abandoning any pretense of paternal warmth. He wanted to silence the threat, to force the truth back into the shadows where his family preferred to operate. Hazel William commanded, his voice trembling with a terrifying, uncontainable rage. "You will leave this room right now. You will stop embarrassing this family in front of our guests, and you will wait for me in the parking lot." He pointed a rigid finger toward the heavy oak exit doors, expecting the weight of his lifelong authority to crush my resistance. He anticipated the obedient daughter, who had endured years of holiday insults in silence, to lower her head and comply. He failed to comprehend that the woman standing before him no longer sought his approval. I held my ground. I did not flinch, and I did not lower my gaze. I looked into the eyes of the man who had dismissed my intellect, mocked my career, and stood by while his son attempted to steal my grandmother's sanctuary. "I am not embarrassing you, William," I replied, my voice steady and resonant in the cavernous space. "I am preventing this firm from becoming an accessory to federal wire fraud." William recoiled as if he had been physically struck. The word fraud echoed off the high ceilings of the armory, piercing the fragile bubble of the gala. The attendees murmured in shocked tones, their whispers creating a rising tide of scandal that would wash over the city by morning. At the VIP table, the lead underwriter leaned over and whispered frantically into Marcus Thorne's ear. He pointed to the digital metadata logs and the fraudulent financing statement. Marcus did not need to hear the entire legal analysis. He had survived decades in the venture capital sector by recognizing the scent of a sinking ship. A developer presenting false collateral was a liability. A developer utilizing medical bribery to cover his tracks was a radioactive hazard. Marcus Thorne placed his hands flat on the white tablecloth. He pushed his heavy mahogany chair back. The sharp, grating screech of wood scraping against the polished marble floor echoed in the silent room, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. It was the sound of a closing vault. Marcus stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate finality. He did not look at the architectural renderings glowing on the stage screens. He did not look at my father, who was standing frozen in shock. He looked directly at Preston. Preston was still clutching the original deed, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and pleading. He reached a hand out toward the venture capitalist, opening his mouth to spin another fabricated narrative, to offer an excuse to beg for a secondary review. Marcus did not let him speak. He viewed Preston with a look of utter, undisguised disgust. It was the look reserved for a con artist who had dared to waste his time and risk his capital. "We are done," Marcus said. Those 3 words severed the lifeline. Marcus turned away from the table and walked toward the exit. His team of attorneys and underwriting associates snapped their leather portfolios shut and followed immediately in his wake, a synchronized departure of wealth and credibility. They moved with the urgent pace of a tactical retreat, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Vance empire. Preston watched them leave. The multi-million-dollar wire transfer he needed to save his over-leveraged development firm had just evaporated into thin air. The syndication agreements remained unsigned on the silver tray, useless pieces of paper resting next to the evidence of his impending criminal indictment. The funding was gone. The grand vision for Oakhaven was dead. The ballroom remained paralyzed, trapped in the aftermath of the rapid financial execution. The society guests who only moments ago had been eager to toast to Preston and his visionary brilliance were now inching away, creating a wide physical perimeter around my family. The Vance name, once a symbol of unearned superiority and historic roots, had just been permanently stained. I stood in the center of the wreckage, my hands empty, my posture relaxed. The trap had functioned flawlessly. I had neutralized the threat to my grandmother's home without raising my voice, without throwing a tantrum, and without compromising my integrity. I had let their own greed trigger the mechanism. The departure of Marcus Thorne acted as a silent alarm for the rest of the room. In the insular world of Southern high society, scandal operates as a highly contagious pathogen. The guests did not linger to offer sympathy or ask clarifying questions. They executed a swift, coordinated retreat. The rustle of silk gowns and the muted, urgent requests for valet tickets replaced the ambient hum of polite conversation. Waiters stepped back into the shadows of the catering corridors. The string musicians lowered their bows, packed their instruments into velvet-lined cases, and slipped out the side exit without a single note of farewell. The cavernous armory ballroom, designed to host hundreds of distinguished guests, emptied in a matter of minutes. The rapid exodus left the Vance family isolated near the grand stage. They stood surrounded by abandoned champagne flutes, untouched plates of seared scallops, and melting ice sculptures shaped like the state of Georgia. The towering digital screens behind the stage remained active. They continued to project vivid architectural renderings of the Oakhaven project, casting a bright, mocking glow over the deserted floor. The contrast between the digital fantasy of unearned wealth and the stark reality of the empty room was profound. The facade of the unified, prosperous dynasty dropped the moment the heavy oak doors closed behind the last departing guest. Savannah turned toward her husband. The pristine, composed exterior of the Charleston debutante dissolved, revealing the raw panic of a woman who had just realized she was tethered to a sinking anchor. She had married Preston for his trajectory. She had endured his arrogance, overlooked his flaws, and defended his name because it came paired with a promise of limitless capital and elevated social standing. Hearing the venture capitalist cite fraudulent collateral and hidden debt severed her only reason for remaining in the marriage. "You lied to me," Savannah said. Her voice echoed in the hollow space, sharp and accusing. She stripped away the synthetic sweetness she usually deployed for the country club set. "You told me the Savannah waterfront projects were delayed due to routine supply chain issues. You told me the holding company was flush with cash. You never told me you were leveraged. You pledged an asset you do not own because you are broke." Preston raised a trembling hand, attempting to quiet her. He glanced around the empty room, still trapped in the delusion that optics mattered even when the audience had vanished. "Keep your voice down, Savannah," he hissed, tugging at the collar of his velvet dinner jacket. "I can fix this. I just need to speak with the underwriters on Monday. I will explain the probate situation." "You cannot fix wire fraud," Preston Savannah fired back. Her face flushed a mottled shade of red, the tendons in her neck pulling tight. Thorne just walked out. "The compliance officers are already drafting their internal reports. Your creditors are going to read about this in the business journals by tomorrow morning. They will trigger the default clauses and freeze our accounts. You ruined us." My mother stood frozen near the edge of the stage. Patricia had spent her entire adult life avoiding unpleasant realities by focusing on floral arrangements, charity galas, and social hierarchy. Faced with the undeniable financial ruin of her favored child and the public humiliation of her family name, she simply shut down. She stared at the abandoned VIP table, her hands clutching her emerald satin evening bag, unable to process the destruction of her carefully curated world. My father operated differently. William viewed every crisis as a negotiation waiting to be won through sheer force of will. He possessed a dangerous inability to accept defeat. He assessed the wreckage, recognized the immediate legal threat facing his son, and identified the only remaining variable capable of salvaging his reputation. He turned his attention to me. William marched across the polished hardwood floor, closing the distance between us with heavy, determined strides. He stopped 2 feet away, puffing out his chest, attempting to invoke a lifelong pattern of patriarchal command. He did not ask for an explanation regarding the deed. He did not inquire about Clara and her intentions. He focused solely on the extraction of the asset. "You are going to fix this," Hazel William ordered. His voice carried a desperate, brittle edge that betrayed his mounting fear. "You will contact your attorney first thing Monday morning. You will sign a quitclaim deed, transferring the Oakhaven title over to Preston and his holding company. Once the land is legally in his name, I will personally call Marcus Thorne and smooth over this misunderstanding. We can frame the entire incident as a minor clerical error regarding the timeline of the inheritance." I looked at the man who had spent 3 decades measuring my worth against his own distorted metrics. He was asking me to surrender the foundation of our family history to shield a criminal from the consequences of his own greed. He genuinely believed his parental authority superseded my legal ownership and my moral compass. "This is about saving the family honor," William insisted, stepping closer, his face mere inches from mine. "If this scandal hits the public record, the Vance name will be worthless in this state. Our legacy will be a joke. You owe this to us. You owe this to the family. Sign the paper and stop this nonsense right now." I kept my posture relaxed. I held the 3 black presentation folders securely at my side. I had waited 6 years to deliver my response. For 6 years I had attended every holiday gathering, eaten every meal, and driven home to my leased apartment in silence, while they used my life as the punchline for their jokes. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout. I spoke with the calm, devastating clarity of a final verdict. "You do not care about family honor," I said. William blinked, thrown by the flat, unemotional refusal. "You care about prestige," I continued, holding his gaze until he was forced to look away. "Honor is protecting the vulnerable. Prestige is pretending you are superior while stealing from your own mother to fund a failing business. Grandma knew the difference. She watched you both operate. She knew you would strip the soil bare and sell it to the highest bidder the moment you had the chance. That is why she trusted the renter to protect the legacy you were trying to pawn." The words landed with physical force. William took a slow, unsteady step backward. The illusion of his command shattered, leaving him looking frail and remarkably ordinary in his expensive tuxedo. He had no leverage left. I held the deed, I held the data, and I held the permanent moral high ground. I turned my back on him. I did not wait for a rebuttal. The conversation was concluded. I walked toward the heavy oak exit doors, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the hardwood floor. Halfway across the room, my foot landed on a small cylindrical object. It was the laser pointer Preston had intended to use during his grand presentation, dropped during his frantic scramble from the stage. I brought my heel down squarely on the center of the device. The cheap plastic casing snapped in half with a sharp, distinct crack. The sound echoed through the empty ballroom, serving as a quiet final punctuation mark on his destroyed development dreams. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool, humid air of the Savannah night. I left them standing alone in the cavernous room, surrounded by the wreckage of their own arrogance. The days following the Savannah Historical Society event unfolded with the predictable cascading logic of a compromised operating system shutting down. I returned to my leased apartment in Midtown, resumed my regular work schedule, and watched the Vance development empire dismantle itself from a safe, detached distance. Without the Oakhaven deed to serve as a fraudulent anchor, Preston had no leverage left to offer his creditors. The men who held the high-interest bridge loans on his stagnant waterfront projects did not care about his tailored velvet jackets or his country club pedigree. They cared about liquidity, and my brother had none. The financial sector moves with severe efficiency when a deception is exposed. I monitored the public civil dockets during my lunch breaks, tracking the inevitable collapse. Foreclosure notices hit the municipal registry in rapid succession. Preston was forced to liquidate his remaining corporate vehicles and sell off his office equipment just to cover the immediate penalty fees. By the end of the month, his primary holding company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The business journals published brief, unforgiving articles detailing the sudden insolvency of the once promising firm. Savannah reacted to the evaporating wealth exactly as I anticipated. Recognizing that the financial well had run dry and the social cachet was permanently poisoned, she packed her designer luggage and relocated to her parents' estate in Charleston. She filed for divorce shortly after her departure, citing irreconcilable differences in the legal filings. Everyone in our extended circle understood the true reason for the separation. Her loyalty was entirely conditional, tied to a bank balance that no longer existed. While Preston navigated the wreckage of his company, William faced the grim reality of the probate court system. He had assumed his emergency petition to declare Clara incompetent would glide through the judicial process unchecked. He retained an expensive litigation team confident that his checkbook could manufacture a favorable verdict. He underestimated the rigid, inescapable architecture of documented facts. I hired a sharp, unassuming elder care attorney who did not wear flashy watches or brag about his win rate. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, my attorney met William's high-priced litigator in the quiet corridor outside the judge's chambers. My representative did not argue. He simply opened his worn leather briefcase and handed over the black forensic binder I had compiled. He walked the opposing counsel through the metadata extraction logs, proving the medical affidavit was backdated. He highlighted the municipal expenditure reports demonstrating the $50,000 payout from Preston to the corrupt concierge doctor. The high-priced litigator recognized a career-ending ethical violation immediately. Presenting a bribed medical professional to a sitting judge would trigger an automatic investigation by the State Bar Association. He pulled William into a private consultation room and explained the profound criminal liability they were facing. Faced with the undeniable evidence of conspiracy and impending perjury charges, my father was forced into a total surrender. William formally withdrew the emergency guardianship petition before the court clerk even called the docket. He walked out of the downtown courthouse a defeated man, his patriarchal authority permanently broken by a stack of printed data. The legal threat to Clara was extinguished. The consequences extended far beyond the courtroom and the bank ledgers. In the insular, status-obsessed neighborhoods of Buckhead, reputation serves as the primary currency. The scandal surrounding the failed syndication, the fraudulent collateral, and the abandoned probate petition spread through the elite networks with lethal precision. The Vance family experienced a swift, brutal social excommunication. The prestigious country club where my parents had spent 3 decades hosting extravagant holiday dinners held a closed board session and quietly declined to renew their annual membership. The charity organizations my mother had chaired suddenly reorganized their leadership structures, omitting Patricia from the new rosters. Invitations stopped arriving in their mailbox. Phone calls went to voicemail and remained unreturned. Patricia attempted to attend a routine luncheon for the local Historical Preservation Society and found her seat reassigned to a back corner, her former friends suddenly fascinated by their salads whenever she approached. The silence of the elite is far more devastating than their anger. William and Patricia were left isolated in their sprawling mansion, surrounded by expensive antique furniture with no audience left to impress. I did not gloat over their downfall. Vengeance is an emotional response, and emotion clouds operational judgment. I closed the digital tracking files on my workstation and refocused my attention on my primary objective. Clara was ready to leave the cardiac rehabilitation facility. Her physical strength had returned, and her mind remained as sharp as the crisp autumn air settling over the Georgia landscape. I arranged for a specialized private medical transport to bring her home. On the morning of Clara's scheduled discharge, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The caller ID displayed my mother's number. I let the call ring through to the automated system. A few minutes later, the transcription notification appeared on my screen. I pressed play to listen to the audio recording. Patricia's voice wavered, carrying a bitter, trembling edge. She did not apologize for attempting to steal my grandmother's home. She did not acknowledge the illegal actions of her son or the cruelty of her husband. Instead, she chose to cast herself as the victim of an ungrateful child. "You tore this family apart, Hazel," Patricia whispered into the receiver, her tone dripping with toxic resentment. "You destroyed your brother's future over a piece of dirt. I hope you are happy sitting alone with your stubbornness. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." I listened to her voice for exactly 10 seconds. She was still trapped in a fabricated reality where she was the martyr and I was the villain. I did not feel a trace of guilt, sadness, or hesitation. I moved my thumb over the glowing screen and pressed the delete icon. The audio cut off mid-sentence, erasing her manipulation with total finality. I blocked her number in my contact settings, ensuring my digital perimeter remained as secure as my physical one. I drove out to Oak Haven ahead of the medical transport vehicle. The historic property sat quietly under the vast southern sky, the ancient live oaks swaying in the gentle morning breeze. The temporary wooden stakes placed by the surveying crew were long gone, leaving the soil undisturbed and peaceful. I parked my sedan near the main entrance where the heavy wrought iron gates marked the official property boundary. I retrieved a heavy canvas tool bag from the trunk. I walked up to the iron gates, pulled out a steel wrench, and began the methodical process of dismantling the old brass padlocks and chain assemblies. My grandfather had installed those traditional locks decades ago, distributing copies of the brass keys to William and Preston. Those keys represented access privilege and the arrogant assumption of eventual ownership. I removed the rusted hardware, letting the heavy metal clatter onto the gravel driveway. I reached into my bag and retrieved a heavy-duty biometric locking mechanism. I had wired this new hardware directly to a decentralized security network I coded myself. The upgraded system required a specific encrypted token to grant entry, rendering any old physical keys entirely useless. I secured the heavy steel housing around the iron gate bars, testing the digital latch to ensure the deadbolt engaged with a solid, satisfying click. The perimeter was officially secure. The historic pastures, the dense eastern timber, and the white farmhouse were safe under my watch. The land was untainted by bulldozers, unburdened by hidden debt, and permanently shielded from the arrogance of men who only valued the soil for the financial leverage it could provide. I wiped the dark grease from my hands with a shop towel and turned to watch the long driveway. In the distance, the medical transport van pulled slowly off the rural highway, bringing the true matriarch back to the sanctuary she had so fiercely protected. 6 months had passed since the night the venture capital syndication collapsed in the historic armory. The humid, biting chill of the Georgia winter slowly surrendered to the soft, golden warmth of late April. The air rolling across the Oak Haven estate carried the familiar scent of wild jasmine, damp earth, and blooming dogwood trees. I sat on the wraparound wooden porch of the main farmhouse, occupying a woven wicker chair identical to the one my grandmother favored. The morning sun filtered through the dense, heavy canopy of the ancient live oaks, casting long, shifting shadows across the wide, painted floorboards. The environment was a masterclass in tranquility. There was no sound of heavy machinery tearing through the topsoil, no diesel engines roaring in the distance to pour concrete foundations, no surveying crews driving wooden stakes into the pasture to map out artificial boundaries. The only noise was the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of a mockingbird, and the low, steady hum of my laptop cooling fan. I typed a sequence of administrative commands into my terminal, reviewing a routine security patch for a corporate client based in Atlanta. Working remotely allowed me to blend my two realities with perfect symmetry. The digital realm of firewalls, encryption keys, and secure networks merged seamlessly with the physical sanctuary of the historic property. My parents used to mock my profession, dismissing it as merely typing on a screen while they pursued tangible wealth. They failed to realize that securing a network requires the exact same discipline as securing a legacy. You must identify vulnerabilities, fortify the perimeter, anticipate the vectors of attack, and remain vigilant against those who seek to exploit the system for their own selfish gain. I had applied my trade to my own lineage, patching the ultimate vulnerability before the hostile actors could execute their payload. Beside me, Clara Vance rested in her own rocking chair. Her recovery over the past 6 months had been steady, deliberate, and remarkably successful. The frail, exhausted woman who had whispered county clerk codes in a dim hospital room was gone. Today she wore a light cotton blouse, her silver hair catching the morning light, her posture radiating quiet authority. She held a tall glass of sweet iced tea, the condensation gathering on the outside of the glass in the warming air. She did not need to speak to convey her strength. Her presence was a quiet anchor, a living testament to her resilience and foresight. She took a slow sip of her drink, her eyes scanning the unbroken horizon of the eastern timberline. We sat together in a comfortable, profound silence, bound by the shared knowledge of the heritage we had protected. An encrypted email notification chimed softly on my computer screen. The sender was the elder care attorney I had retained during the probate dispute. I clicked open the message, scanning the brief legal update provided in the text. The federal regulatory agencies had finalized their preliminary inquiry into Preston and his holding company. The Securities and Exchange Commission, acting on the discrepancies uncovered during the failed Savannah syndication, had formally transferred the case file to the Department of Justice. The investigators were building a comprehensive wire fraud indictment, centering on the fraudulent Uniform Commercial Code financing statements my brother had filed. Preston was currently surrendering his remaining liquid assets to federal liquidators to offset the impending regulatory fines. His luxury vehicles, his tailored velvet suits, and his carefully curated image were being cataloged and auctioned off by government bureaucrats. He was facing a bleak reality where his surname offered zero protection against a federal prison sentence. The email also included a brief footnote regarding my parents. William had officially resigned from his remaining corporate board positions. He no longer attended the weekly downtown luncheons or the charity galas. His sprawling mansion in Buckhead had become a self-imposed fortress of isolation. Patricia shared in this exile her social calendar, empty, her phone refusing to ring. Without his country club memberships and his affluent social circle to validate his ego, my father simply faded into the background. He spent his days wandering the empty halls of his oversized house, surrounded by expensive antique furniture, trapped in the quiet realization that his quest for prestige had cost him his entire family. He had gambled his dignity for leverage, and he had lost everything that actually mattered. I closed the email application, allowing the screen to return to a blank desktop. I leaned back in my wicker chair and directed my gaze outward. 200 acres of prime Georgia soil stretched out before me, rolling in gentle green waves toward the distant tree line. I thought back to the Thanksgiving dinner that had initiated this entire sequence of events. I remembered the heavy sterling silver, the expensive bourbon, and the coordinated laughter echoing down the mahogany table. I recalled the way Preston had smiled while mocking my leased apartment, and the way Patricia had sighed, wishing I possessed the ambition to secure a proper foundation. They had used my modest lifestyle as the punchline for every holiday gathering. They viewed my lack of real estate as a symptom of failure, assuming I would spend my life writing rent checks while they built their grand empires. Yet as I looked at the sprawling, pristine landscape, the irony settled over me with a quiet, satisfying weight. The daughter they ridiculed for never being able to afford property was now the sole guardian of the most valuable asset in their lineage. I held the deed. I held the digital keys. I held the power to dictate the future of the soil they had tried so desperately to exploit. I never entertained a single thought of developing the land. The venture capitalists from Atlanta had attempted to contact me several times after the gala, offering lucrative purchase agreements and complex partnership structures. I declined every single inquiry. Oak Haven was not a financial instrument to be carved into luxury subdivisions or paved with private equestrian trails for the amusement of the elite. It was a living testament to endurance. It was a sanctuary that deserved to remain unbroken. By preserving the acreage, I was honoring the true roots of our family history, rejecting the shallow, transactional mindset that had poisoned the previous generation. Sitting on the porch in the golden spring light, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I realized that a genuine legacy has nothing to do with loud declarations flashing expensive watches or demanding respect from a podium. It is not built on the exploitation of the vulnerable or the manipulation of the truth to impress a ballroom full of strangers. True legacy is rooted in quiet competence. It is the willingness to stand in the shadows, gather the necessary data, and build a secure perimeter around the people who cannot fight back. It is the patience to endure the insults of the arrogant, knowing that their egos will eventually blind them to their own fatal errors. It is the discipline to wait for the precise, perfect moment to let the facts do the talking. Clara set her glass of iced tea down on the small wicker table separating our chairs. She reached over and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, her grip steady and reassuring. We did not need to discuss the past or worry about the future. The threat was neutralized. The firewall was holding. The land was safe. I looked at the rolling green fields one last time, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. I reached forward, closed the lid of my laptop with a soft click, and smiled. I was finally home.
We sit at polished mahogany tables, unfolding crisp linen napkins over our laps, and somehow we convince ourselves that we can measure a human being's worth by the square footage of the roof over their head. For 6 long years, Hazel Vance sat at such a table. Her rented apartment served as the reliable punchline for a family that measured success exclusively in property deeds and country club invitations. They looked at her modest address and saw a lack of ambition. They saw an absence of equity. What they failed to recognize was the quiet, immovable foundation she was building entirely out of their sight. Her silence in the face of their constant ridicule offers a profound lesson in self-control. This narrative is not merely a tale of a hidden deed or a ruined development project. It is a mirror reflecting the quiet tragedy of how modern American society assigns value, and a stark reminder that true competence rarely feels the need to shout. From a deeper, almost spiritual perspective, the family's fixation on property and titles reveals a systemic generational ignorance. They fell victim to the illusion of fame and appearance, clinging to superficial material markers to frame a person's worth. People often pride themselves on outwardly displayed successes. They parade their luxury vehicles and their sprawling estates without realizing that genuine capability operates in total silence. Hazel driving home in the dark, absorbing their insults without a single raised voice, demonstrates a rare transcendence. She bypassed the turbulent waters of praise and criticism. A person harboring true inner strength understands that value is proven by actual competence and inner peace, not by unsolicited advice or the shallow judgments of relatives who mistake arrogance for achievement. This dynamic serves as a necessary wake-up call for American parents regarding family education and responsibility. Raising a child in a traditional family structure requires much more than providing a roof and setting arbitrary expectations. It demands a fundamental respect for individual autonomy. Every child arrives as a unique entity, possessing their own distinct inclinations and strengths. Children are not ornaments designed to maintain appearances or elevate the social standing of the family. They are individuals deserving of authentic acceptance and the space to grow into their true selves. When parents treat their offspring as extensions of their own egos, they subvert the very foundation of familial love, replacing it with conditional approval based on superficial prestige. Honesty in a traditional family structure means facing the reality of a child's unique capabilities without masking them in disappointment. Fairness means distributing love and respect equally, regardless of whether a child's career choice produces a bronze plaque on a wall or a quiet, steady paycheck. Furthermore, parental love must pair with scientific practical guidance. Emotional support is vital, but it must align with the practical realities of the modern labor market. Instead of forcing children down outdated paths or into stagnant professions merely for the sake of prestige, families must collaborate to navigate the future. We must focus on core fields demonstrating long-term workforce needs, such as STEM or healthcare. By choosing a career as an information security analyst, Hazel demonstrated strategic foresight. Guiding a child requires providing a comprehensive foundation for self-reliance. This includes fostering superior academic skills, independent thinking, and the emotional awareness necessary to adapt to a shifting world. A lack of honest, fair guidance can cause young adults to waste years chasing empty titles, unable to achieve financial independence or personal peace. In the Vance family, the true compass of traditional morality did not reside with the loudest voices at the dinner table. It rested with the grandmother. Clara embodied the quiet wisdom of the elders. She did not waste her breath arguing with the shallowness of her son or the arrogance of her grandson. She practiced silent awareness. Recognizing the impending ruin, she quietly executed the crucial legal matters behind closed doors. She used the unassailable truth of a property deed to transform the situation. This is how a person of great wisdom navigates conflict. They solve problems at their root, acting with pure integrity and providing silent protection for the ones they love. It is the ultimate triumph of facts over manipulation. To build a truly good and happy life, an individual must turn inward. Self-improvement rests on 3 pillars: wisdom, morality, and fortitude. Wisdom is the pursuit of truth. A wise person views the world through empirical data and objective facts, much like an analyst evaluating a digital network. This analytical mindset prevents us from being swept away by the emotional drama of others teaching us when to remain silent and wait for the perfect moment to deploy the truth. Morality in this context is defined by patience and detachment. It is the ability to master anger, refusing to respond to hostility with hostility. Hazel's tolerance toward her family reflects a deep foundation of traditional morality rooted in honor and silent restraint. Finally, fortitude is the unwavering determination to stand firm. Enduring years of constant ridicule while staying true to the path one has chosen requires an extraordinary self-reliant will. Fortitude is cultivated through self-discipline. It is born from the ability to overcome loneliness and stand on your own 2 feet amidst the gathering storms of life. When a person possesses sufficient morality to be tolerant, sufficient wisdom to elevate their mind, and sufficient fortitude to define themselves, they illuminate their own path. They take control of their life without any struggle or endless justification. We all sit at tables where our worth is questioned. We all face moments where the world demands we prove ourselves using their flawed metrics. The question is whether we will shout to be heard or whether we will build our foundations in the quiet dark, waiting for the truth to speak on our behalf. If you appreciate narratives where quiet courage outlasts loud arrogance and where the truth takes its time but never misses, join our community. Drop a comment sharing how you have handled the loud voices in your own life, and be sure to subscribe to Orange Vengeance. We explore the quiet victories of ordinary people facing impossible choices every week. Consider the foundations you are building today. Are they constructed of borrowed prestige and fragile opinions, or are they rooted in something deeper? We spend our lives cultivating gardens for other people to admire, often forgetting to check if the soil beneath our own feet is secure. The storm always reveals the strength of the root, and sometimes, as the noise of the world reaches a deafening pitch, the most defining moment of our existence is simply choosing to sit back, smile, and say nothing at all.